Hey, Jeremy, it's great to have you here today. I've been looking forward to this conversation because your journey with Focus Bear is such a powerful example of building something for yourself, but in doing so, helping so many others. You've taken your own lived experience as a neurodivergent founder and turned it into a productive app that isn't like any other distraction blockers. It actually supports sustainable focus and mental health. That's rare. So let's start at the beginning. You said traditional productivity tools just didn't cut it for you. What did you see or did not see in existing apps that pushed you to build Focus Bear?
The problem that I was facing for myself was I'd be at work and I was meant to do a task that I didn't find particularly interesting. And I would procrastinate. I'd decide, oh, before I start doing this, I'll just read the news. And I tried using a lot of the blocker apps. And what I found was I'd just go and find really obscure news websites that I didn't have on my block list. And those other apps didn't really work because I had to define which sites were distracting. So I wanted something that would actually have some contextual understanding of what I was trying to do and nudge me back in the right direction if I went onto a site or an app that wasn't relevant. And with the advent of LLMs, that's now possible to do. So I set out to build an app that would do that, that it would notice either on my phone or on my computer if I deviated away from something that I should be working on. And then the other thing was that the other apps were almost bad for me because I'd get into a focus state at some point and then I just wouldn't stop working and I'd work until midnight. And then I didn't sleep and my wife was unhappy with me because I wasn't spending any time with her. So I actually wanted something that would kick me off my computer at a certain time because after that, I actually should be going to make dinner and look after my relationship and look after my own health.
Absolutely. Very powerful examples. I know that in the early days, you tried to do a bit of everything with the app you built. So at what point did you realize the feature set was actually too much and hurting the experience? And how did you decide what to cut and what to keep?
The answer to the last part is I didn't cut anything, but I have hidden some of the more advanced features because the moment where I discovered that was I was doing think aloud user testing where I'd get people to go through the onboarding process with me and I'd observe the points where they seemed to hesitate, even if they didn't actually say, I feel confused by this. I just could tell that the screen was too crowded and that there was too much going on. And what we ended up doing was we introduced geek mode, which is
Mm.
basically the power user mode where you can switch on some of the more advanced features. And we hid most of the features that I wanted for myself behind that toggle.
You give people options. Yeah.
Hmm.
That sounds like a quite tedious but important pivot. How did that experience actually influence your broader design philosophy, especially when you are thinking about neurodivergent users?
What I found from doing the Think Aloud user testing is that the way that I consume information online is not necessarily the same as everyone else. I'm a very fast reader. I read often 3 times faster than other people, and so I'm quite happy with having a lot of text on the screen. But it turns out other people don't feel that way, and they actually find that overwhelming, and they want to abandon the app. So one example of a change that we've made is I recognize that there are people like me who like a lot of information, and there are other people who want to skim. And so what we've done is we've kept all of the extra information, but we hide it behind tooltips. So for each little piece of information on the screen, there's a very short description. And then if you click on the info icon next to it, it pulls up a pop-up that has a lot more information. And I think that's been helpful in terms of a design philosophy that is inclusive of people who might have dyslexia as well as ADHD or autism, because we're trying to build software that is supporting neurodivergent people, and we know how much crossover there is between ADHD and autism and comorbidities like dyslexia.
Yeah, I feel that I'm definitely in the camp of people who prefer simpler design and less text to read. Speaking of design, onboarding is where so many apps actually fail and lose people. And you have talked openly about how your original flow didn't work. So what changes did you make that finally clicked with users?
We haven't necessarily solved the issue that we have with onboarding, but it is a fair bit better. The obvious change that we made compared to a few years ago is we've reduced it in duration a lot. I was trying to explain all the features of the app during onboarding, and I realized that it's just too much to introduce all at once. So we've cut it back. It went from being a 15-minute onboarding process with our original version of the Mac app to now more like 3 minutes if you do it very quickly. And that has helped, but we've still found that it's not perfect. Right now, our metrics look like roughly 45% of people complete one of the key features in the app. They start the onboarding, they go through the formal onboarding, and then they actually start a focus session or do a habit in the app. I'd rather that be more like 70%, so we still have a way to go. And I'm working with our UX team around that. The way we're approaching it is a combination of heuristic reviews where we just look at it and we challenge each screen and ask ourselves, does this screen really need to be introduced at this point? And does it need to be as complex as it is? And then after we've done that internal review, we go and test it with real users and get their feedback through Think Aloud user testing.
I know you did a lot to arrive at those insights and findings, right? So because you did something actually a lot of founders skip. You talked to over 200 users. So what surprised you most from those conversations with users, and how did it reshape your direction with the company?
Explain the actual process first before I talk about the results. I was very intimidated by user interviews because I'd heard it as common advice, but I had concerns about how do I actually find people to talk to, and why would they want to talk to me? Is it really worth it? The way that I've overcome that is a few things. One hack that I'd recommend is what you're doing right now, Carol. I started a podcast, and my podcast, it's a podcast, but it's also actually a user interview because I'm asking people who are within my target demographic some of the questions that I want to know to understand the psychographics. I ask them about what challenges they face with their productivity, and that has led to a lot of insights for me. I've found there's two groups of people. There's some people who I interview who know a lot about productivity and have really well-established systems. And then there's people who have very little understanding and who've never heard, for example, of the Pomodoro technique, the 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes break. And I thought it was universal knowledge. So the original version of Focus Bear, it was loaded with that type of jargon that it had Pomodoro technique in multiple places. And it was only after doing quite a lot of user interviews that were not on podcasts, they were with regular people, that I found a lot of people would get to that point and say, what is the Pomodoro technique? And I realized I either have to educate people or I can just remove the confusing terminology that people who know what the Pomodoro technique will recognize it because we default to have 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. But people who've never heard of it, they don't need to have the cognitive overhead of understanding it. The other interesting finding for me was I went into it with a this mindset that laptops were the problem because that's where my problem was. I had a really bad phone intentionally that was quite unpleasant to use. And so I wouldn't really distract myself on my phone because it was so slow and cumbersome that I'd never go and stream or look on social media with my phone. I'd do it on my computer instead. And so I invested a lot of time, money, and effort into building a Mac app and a Windows app. And I found that that's actually uncommon, that for most people, they're not likely to be as distracted on their laptop. They're more likely to be doing work on their laptop, but then get distracted by a notification on their phone or something, an app that they want to check. And I've had to backfill and spend a lot more time more recently on the mobile app. And that's leading to overall a lot more adoption. We get now 10 times more people downloading the mobile app than we get of our desktop app.
It's
Maybe
a
that's
very
obvious to everyone else, but it wasn't obvious to me.
No, actually, as a founder, a common mistake we make is that we assume what we know is actually should actually be what everyone knows or everyone actually knows, but it's not necessarily the truth. We have to do the survey to understand our user better. Indeed. Now shifting a bit to team dynamics. Focus Bear isn't just unique in what it does, but also in how you have built the company. I know you have done something very special. So tell us, what have you done differently in hiring that actually helped you to build a team very unique?
To go back a step here, I don't think I've mentioned clearly that our app is designed for neurodivergent people. And originally it was built for myself because I'm autistic and ADHD. And I feel that there's a unique set of challenges that come alongside those neurotypes where we're much more prone to impulsivity and to getting distracted and also to burnout. And I recognize that if I'm trying to build a tool for people in that demographic, then it's helpful to have my own lived experience. But I don't represent every person who has ADHD and autism. I'm probably unusual in some ways. And so I sought to, as well as talking to customers, to have people who are within that demographic part of the team. So we've got roughly a 45% neurodivergent to neurotypical ratio at Focus Bear. And that is quite intentional that I've been trying to bring people on the team who are like our users. The other aspect of that is 70% of our users are university students. And so I've hired quite a few university students. I've got currently 62 university students on the team. Most of them are via university internships, where they're getting credit points as part of their study. And then the ones who show that they have amazing talent, I then, depending on how cash flow is going at that point, I'm able to offer them jobs as well. And that's been a great way to get that user voice constantly.
Speaking of your target user demographic, right? Yourself, you said is a neurodivergent user. I know you actually use your own product every day. As you said, eat your own dog food. So can you walk me through your daily routine, how you use it, how long do you use it normally, and how had it helped you?
I'm the number one user in terms of adoption, according to our metrics. We have a leaderboard, and I'm generally number one on the leaderboard. The way I use the app personally is it's got a morning routine feature, which is how I start my day. So I'll wake up in the morning and I begin my day with yoga. The app has a way of embedding YouTube videos, which is important for me because I want to have something to follow along to. But if I go onto the YouTube app, I'm likely to get distracted by random Mr. Beast videos instead of doing my workout. So I'll go through and I'll do my yoga. It'll walk me through the other aspects of my morning routine, going for a run, doing some meditation, doing some journaling, logging how much sleep I got. And then after I've completed the morning routine, I use the app to help me focus throughout the day. So it will block distractions for me and also align my to-do list. In terms of how that has affected product development, it has meant that I come up with a lot of ideas because I'm constantly using the app and I see the rough edges and I can immediately pass them to our developers. There is a risk in that, though. I think I mentioned earlier that my desires are not necessarily aligned with that of a new user. And so I've had to deprioritize some of my beautiful ideas that are just not really going to be used by the majority of users because I'm a power user and we're not quite at the point where we've solved the basic use case yet. So I'm having to regretfully put some of my ideas on the back burner.
It really sounds like this is an app that I could use. Because I'm also a person who easily get distracted by all sorts of small things outside every day. Right. Okay. So last one If someone just starting to build something for a niche or an underserved group, especially one they belong to, what is the one thing you would tell them to do first?
I'd say to start off with, it's a good idea to build it for a niche. I'll give another reference point apart from Focus Bear. My last business was integration for Zoho CRM, and I'd been in the Zoho ecosystem for 10 years prior to building this plugin. And it meant that I understood the market really well, and I had an audience at that point as well because I had been established in that area. I'd written a book, I had a relatively popular YouTube channel, and it meant when I published the app, I was doing it based on deep knowledge of what the market needed. And I also already had a beta testing group that knew me and trusted me. The the challenge if you're going into a niche cold is that you don't have any authority, no one knows you, you don't really understand the group, and so it can be quite hard to build up momentum there. So what I've found, even for Focus Bear, I got diagnosed with autism 8 years ago, and I identified quite strongly already with autism. ADHD was actually unexpected for me. I didn't anticipate that, but I went in for an autism diagnosis, and the psychologist said, as well as assessing you for autism, I've been screening you for ADHD at the same time, and you show up really high. And that was a bit of a shock for me. And I didn't really realize that there was a whole community out there. And so I've had to go through that process of, I guess, getting to know the ADHD community, and it has taken time for me to build up relationships and to understand what people are looking for. The ways that I've done that is partly through Reddit. There's a bunch of subreddits related to ADHD. I quickly found them very overwhelming, and I haven't been on Reddit for in earnest for 2 years, but I made some connections out of my time there early on, and I've turned that into a weekly Zoom meeting that I have with some other neurodivergent people where we get together and generally talk about life challenges. And that has given me an opportunity to understand the needs of people. And I've also done it through in-person meetups where there's in Melbourne, the city where I live, there's quite a few neurodivergent meetups. I've got one that I host myself, and that gives me an opportunity to meet people and to hear their needs. So if you were doing it for a niche, ideally it's one that you've already been part of for a long time and that you're passionate about and that you know people. If you're going into it cold, then I think you have to immerse yourself into the community and spend a lot of time with people so that you understand them and so that they get to know you.
Interestingly, many people actually might not be aware of the fact that they have autism or they have ADHD if they are not doing the screening, for example. What are the symptoms you would say people should observe, should watch out for before they go, try to find out more if they belong to this?
With ADHD, I'll talk about some of the core symptoms. There's impulsivity, which is a situation where you make decisions without really thinking them through. It is very common amongst entrepreneurs. It's part of the reason why maybe people start businesses because they have this impulsive idea that they can actually solve it, even though most people would think it's too hard. And there's often positive aspects to it as well in the right environment, but impulsivity can obviously be a very bad thing in the wrong context, that it can be associated with addiction, can be associated with bad driving, with criminality in the most extreme cases. But there's also other aspects with ADHD around distractibility, that there's this flip side of it can be very hard to start focusing on something that you don't care about and very difficult to stop focusing on something that you care about. And for some people, that results in them spending all day playing video games or reading the news or scrolling through social media. And for others, it can be a work hyperfocus, and it can be a really powerful trait where the type of work that we do aligns with our skills, and then it leads to a lot of productivity because it's just something that we care about a lot. And then on the autism side, there's a few traits. One of them is difficulty with socializing. That was something that affected me a lot as a kid and still to this day, but I've got a lot more self-acceptance around it. And there's also a tendency towards repetitive and restricted interests. For me, that shows up as I'm very, very interested in work and startups. And that can be a problem because my wife finds it a bit boring if I'm constantly talking about startups and optimizing funnels and things like that. If the audience was curious about whether they might be neurodivergent themselves, there's a bunch of online tests that you can do for free where it'll give you a high-level screening and give you an indication about whether it's worth going down the diagnosis path. Diagnosis typically is quite expensive in Australia. It would cost somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000 to do a full assessment. But it can be really life-changing to have that recognition and to have some specialized tools and interventions.
You definitely made me start reflecting on myself more after this session. All right, Jeremy. This has been such a thoughtful and honest conversation. It's clear that Focus Bear is a mission grounded in empathy, iteration, and deep listening. Thanks for sharing your lessons, missteps, and the mindset that carry you through. I know a lot of builders, especially those solving for communities they belong to, will walk away from this inspired. I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Carol. Great to be on the show.